Hello guys, welcome back to our introduction to programming with Python series. So in this tutorial, we're going to be looking at function arguments in Python. Okay, so in the last tutorial, we look at what functions are in Python. We have looked at how to deal with function type hints and all of that. And also covered a bit of about passing arguments and what's the difference between an argument and what's the difference and a parameter, right? The difference between an argument and a parameter. In this tutorial, we're going to increase our knowledge further on the topic. We're going to be talking about we're going to covering function arguments, okay, in much more details, okay. So in Python, we have like positional arguments and keyword arguments, which I explained to you in the last tutorial. And also we have a keyword argument and arguments, and then just the args argument, right? The arbitrary and the keyword arguments in Python, that's what they're called. And you're going to cover all of them in this tutorial. So let's jump into it. So I'm just going to go into my VS Code, and I'm just going to go ahead and create a new file. Again, this is going to be part let me just check it out. This will be part 23. So I'm going to go ahead and simply say part 23, right? So part 23, right? So part 23 part underscore 23.py. Okay, so once I have this file created, I'm going to go ahead and let me just keep some comments here. This is going to be Python function arguments, right? Python function arguments. So once I have this, I'm going to go ahead and create a function. It's going to be called find underscore total. We had this function from the last tutorial. So this function total is going to take in two numbers, x of type int and y is going to be of type int, right? So we're going to go ahead and simply print out the x plus the y, right? So we say x plus y, and that's all we want to do in this function. So we call this function and pass in two numbers which need to be of type integer. So we say find total, and we're going to pass in 10 and 20. That's going to be 30, right? So let's run the code and see. So I'm going to clear the terminal, then simply do python 3, get the spelling right there. So python 3, and then it's going to be part 23.py, and then run that, we get back 30, right? 10 plus 20 is 30. So that's what this function simply does. So I've learned about arguments and what's the difference between an argument and a parameter. So this right here, x and y, right, are called parameters, and what holds the values that we pass in, which are called arguments. So x and y x will hold the value 10, and y will hold the value 20, right? We call those ones positional arguments in Python, right? So x is going to store the value 10 because x is in position 1 and 10 is in position 1, and then y is going to store the value 20 because y is in position 1 and x is in position 1 in terms of the parameters that we have, right? So that's basically it, how it works basically. So that's what to talk about difference between an argument and a parameter in Python, right? So we have covered a bit of arguments and parameters in Python. So now let's look at default values for parameters in Python. So let's say that what if a person calls this function and didn't pass in 10 and 20. So now we're going to be looking at default values for parameters in Python, right? So let me just say that a person calls the total find total function and never passed in x and y. So let's go ahead and run the code and see what we get. Our program crashes, right? Because we never the user didn't pass in any value. So now we can go ahead and actually pass in default values. Are called default parameters in Python. So we can just say that if in case a person passing 10, so in case a person passing x, then we'll use the value for x. But if the person didn't pass in x, then you're going to default to x as 30, right? And let's do the same for y, and y the default will be 40, right? So if I call this function, I didn't pass in x and y, these values, the default values are going to be used, and the default values are 30 and 40 respectively are going to be used, okay? So if I call this function again, now you can still get back 70 because the default values are used. But now let me go back to passing 10 and 20. Now that you have 10 and 20, the default values are not going to be used because we have specified which values to use explicitly. So if I run the code again, you're going to use 30, you're going to get 30 because 10 plus 20 is 30, right? So that's basically it. So if I go ahead and call this function, I didn't pass in y is going to be defaulting to 40. So 40 plus 10 should be 50, and you get back 50. So that's basically how these arguments default arguments work in Python. So these are they called default arguments in Python. So if you see something like this where the parameter is already assigned a value, they are called default parameters in Python. Okay, now let's move on and let's look at keyword arguments in Python. So let me just delete all this function. I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to call it def, and this function is just going to be param underscore names. Okay, it's going to be a function. I'm going to take in x, it's going to be of type integer, and I'm going to take in y, it's going to be of type integer as well. For now, you're just going to return anything, so that we can just say the return type is of type none. So you can just say this and say return type is none, just like that. So you can pass in the return type as none. Okay, so once we have this, I'm going to go ahead and simply say print, and then num, let's say num1, and then num1 is just going to be the I'm going to convert the str version of the number that is passed in, right? strx. I'm just going to copy this and paste it 2 more times. So this is going to be stry, and this is going to be num2. So num2, good. So once we have this function right here, I can simply go ahead and call this function and pass in the keyword argument. So we have the positional argument, which you can simply call by parameter and pass in, let's say 10 and 20. So these are going these are just positional arguments, right? 20 will be in place of y, and 10 will be in place of x. These are called positional arguments, right? And also we can also go ahead and specify the keyword argument. You have to pass in y and x just explicitly like this, and this gonna are called keyword arguments. So if you print them, you get back number 1 and number 2, right? So those are called keyword arguments, and we also have explicit arguments. So like the thing about keyword, using a keyword argument is that the order, you don't need to follow the order, okay? The order in which the order in which the parameters are specified in the function. You don't have to specify that order. But if you're calling this function by passing in a positional argument, then you have to follow the order in which the values are passed. So if you want x to be 10, then you have to pass in the first value as 10. If you want y to be 20, which is the second value, you have to pass in the second argument as 20, right? So those are called positional arguments, right? So it corresponds to position. But if you're using keyword argument, you can pass in y here, and you can pass in x as well. So the position doesn't really matter if you're using keyword argument. So if I run again, you can see now num1 is 20 and num2 is 10, right? We have reversed the roles, right? So that's the thing about position, keyword arguments and positional arguments. Keyword arguments, you have to follow positional arguments, you have to follow the position in which the parameters were specified in the function definition when calling the function. But in parameterized keyword arguments, you don't have to pass in the arguments in the order in which it was specified. The parameters were specified in the function definition. The ordering can be of any sort, as long as you have specified explicitly what y is referring to and what x is referring to. Its position doesn't really matter, and that's the keyword arguments in Python. Okay, so once we have that done, we are good to go. So now let's take a look at arbitrary keyword arguments in Python. So sometimes when you're writing your Python program, you don't know how many arguments the user is going to pass in. So let's say that you have two functions, right? A function 1 and function 2 that simply add two numbers. So just say def, you can say add, and just say num1, right? It's going to be of type integers, or you can say float. Let's say float, and you also have num2, which is going to be of type float as well. So we have these two float values. So I can simply go ahead and simply print num1 plus num2, just like that. So once we have this done, I can also have, what if I want to have another add function that takes in three numbers? So I can add another function, and then say num1 is going to be of type float, and then you can also have num2, which is also going to be of type float. You can also have num3, right? Num3, which is going to be also of type float. And at the end of this, you're going to simply return a floating point value. So we're going to say return, or simply just say print num1, right, plus num2 plus num3. So that's the function that we have, right? So the function takes in three arguments and returns the sum of it all. Okay, what if you want another function that takes in four numbers and returns you the function of it all? Okay, that's easy. I'll just copy the function, paste it, and add in another argument, right? Another parameter that I expect the user to pass in when calling the function. Now, what if I want 1000 of this? I have to copy and paste the code 1000 times. That's like ridiculous, right? So we have this thing called arbitrary arguments in Python, because you don't know you don't know how many users you don't know how many parameters the user, or how many arguments the user is going to pass in. So you can anticipate it. Like if you're having a add function, right? The user might want to add 10 numbers, and the user might want to add 15 numbers, and the user might want to add 100 numbers. So you can write a function to deal with all these specific cases, right? So we have something called arbitrary arguments in Python, and let's see how arbitrary arguments work in Python. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this. I'm going to have a function called find underscore sum, and this function we just say this, and then we say the name of the parameter. So the asterisk means that we don't know how many function is going to be passed in, right? So let's go ahead and actually print this. I'm just going to go ahead and print it now. So I'm going to go ahead and call this function. I'm going to call it and pass in, let's say 30 40 60, and let me call the same function again. I'm going to pass in let's say 70 900 and all of that, 90 or something. So let's write the function, let's see what we get. So it just prints out whatever it gets passed in, right? So using this asterisk, we are telling Python to take in an arbitrary argument, because we don't know a specific number of arguments that the user is going to pass in. So whatever the user passing, even if it's 1000 arguments, you just accept all of them and store it in a variable called num. And num is of type, you can check out its type. You say print and check out the type of num. So check the type of num, and if I run the code again, the type of num is of type tuple. So it's basically a tuple. So it's going to take all the argument that there is a passing, pass it in form of a tuple. So let's say that you want to find the sum of this value. What you simply do ahead is just write a for loop, right? So that's easy to do. So let me just comment this out for now, and let's write a for loop. So to write a for loop, I'm going to say for num. Let me call this nums, right? Because it's many numbers. So for num in nums, right? So we're going to go and say total plus equals to num, and then simply at the end of the time you can just simply print out num. Print out total. So let's define total and say that total let's say it's going to be of type float, and then by default is equals to 0. So that's basically it. So we are going to have a defined total, and then we are going to iterate through whatever this is going to pass. Even if it's one argument, it's going to be stored in a tuple. We're going to iterate through that tuple and simply add all the values from that tuple, right? So if I run the code again, we should get back now the sum of all those values. So now the user can pass in an indefinite amount of arguments as much as he wants, but our program is able to take care of all those arguments that the user passes in without crashing, right? You can accept variable length arguments basically, and that's the purpose of arbitrary arguments in Python, right? Because you don't know how many variables the user is going to pass in, so you can't anticipate it. You just pass, taking all of them and store it in a tuple, and then do anything you want it. It's not necessarily just going to be numbers. You can also be strings. You can also be any of in data type basically, as the user wants to pass in. All of it will be stored inside of a tuple that you can use inside of your code. So that's how you can deal with arbitrary arguments in Python. And the next one I also want to look at is how to add a keyword argument, because I said we're going to be talking about keyword arguments in Python. They're called Quarks, right? So args are for arbitrary arguments, and also have Quarks, which is as keyword arguments, right? KW for keyword, and then for args as for arguments, right? So keyword arguments in Python. So let's see how keyword arguments work. So I'm just gonna go ahead and delete this. And in keyword argument, I'm going to have a function, we call it Quarks underscore func. And this is going to be, you're going to take in keyword argument. And how you take in keyword argument is you use two asterisk, right? So using arbitrary argument, you use a single asterisk in front of the parameter name. For taking keyword argument, you use multiple two asterisks in front of the parameter name. So they are commonly called Quarks in Python. If you use a lot of Python libraries, you come across them as Quarks, but these names can be anything as you wish. That is variable names or parameter names. So it can be anything as you that you want, but they are commonly called Quarks in Python. So I'm just going to go ahead and simply print out the Quarks that we get back, and you can also check the type of the Quarks. Print out its type. So print out the type of Quarks. Just like that. So now we have this code. Let's just call the function. So I'm going to say Quarks, and I'm going to go ahead and pass in a couple. So I'm going to simply say name, and this is used when a person is passing in keyword arguments, right? Let's say name is Prince, right? So not positional arguments, but keyword arguments. So if a person is using keyword arguments, but you don't know how many keyword arguments the user is going to pass in, you can accept all that in the Quark, using the Quark. So let's say age is, let's say 29, and let's just so that's one way. Let's say that another person calls the function and passing just another information. So I say residence, and then say residence equals to, let's say, passing any value. So I press the wrong key, so I'm going to close that. Let's say residence is in Nairobi, so Nairobi, just like that. So once I have this, another user can pass in another keyword argument. So there can be multiple keyword arguments. So if you're writing a program that is expecting to take multiple keyword arguments, but you are unsure of how many keywords the user is going to pass in, then you need to use a keyword argument. Okay. So once I have that, I'm going to go ahead and clear the terminal and then run that. So you can see now it takes all the keyword arguments and stores them in the form of a dictionary. And you can check the type is of type dict. So that is a dictionary. So name is stored as Prince, right, which is here. So name stored as Prince, and then age 29. And then the second we have name Prince, age 29, and then we also have residence. So when we are dealing with keyword arguments, but you don't know, they are called variable length keyword arguments, but because you don't know specifically how many keyword argument the user is going to pass in, so you can accept as a keyword argument, and this is going to pass in the form of a dictionary, and you can work with that dictionary. So we talk about dictionaries in the other tutorials. So let's just say this check out the values of this in Quarks dot items, just like that. So we're going to go ahead and print the key comma the value, just like that. So once we have that, I'm just going to go the val, right? Not the value, but val. Once we do that, I run the code again. We get back the name, prints the age 29, and then finally we have name, prints again age 29, and then finally the residence. So that's basically it, how you can work with keyword arguments, arbitrary arguments in Python, and variable length keyword arguments, right? The variable length keyword arguments, and also the arbitrary arguments, positional arguments, keyword arguments, and also the default parameters. Okay, so that's what you have covered in this tutorial so far. So that's all it for this tutorial. Again, if you guys enjoyed this tutorial so far, make sure you like the video, you subscribe to the YouTube channel, and leave a comment in the comment section below if you have any questions or any recommendations for future videos. Okay, so in the next video, we're going to go ahead and cover recursive function, and we'll see how recursive functions work in Python. So thanks for watching, and see you in the next one. Keep safe.